In 480 BC, Leonidas faced an army so vast it was meant to terrify nations into surrender. But he saw through the illusion. The 300 weren't there to win the pass, they were there to destroy the Persian myth of invincibility. Leonidas turned his own death into a weapon, and with it, he unified Greece. This wasn't heroism, it was psychological warfare. In 480 BC, Leonidas of Sparta faced Xerxes at Thermopylae. Most historians focus on the desperate, heroic defense of the pass. But the real battle wasn't fought on the stone walls. It was fought here, points to head. It was a war between the psychology of overwhelming force and the strategy of calculated martyrdom. And victory would go to the commander who could master not only his own army, but the mind of his enemy. To understand the decision at Thermopylae, we must first clear the fog of romanticism. The popular narrative paints Leonidas as a heroic fatalist, a king embracing a glorious death wish. This is a profound misreading of the Spartan mind. It mistakes the tool for the objective. The 300 were not fanatics. They were instruments. And Leonidas was not a martyr. He was a strategic analyst, executing a cold, complex psychological operation. Here, we must analyze the cognitive framework of the commander. Leonidas was the ultimate product of the agoge, the brutal, lifelong Spartan conditioning system. The agoge was not merely military training, it was an engine for forging a specific type of mind. It systematically dismantled individual identity, personal fear, and the cognitive bias of self-preservation. In their place, it installed an algorithm: the primacy of the polis, the state. When a typical commander assesses a strategic problem, like an unwinnable battle, their mind wrestles with variables of risk, loss, and survival. We see this in the wavering of the other Greek commanders. But when Leonidas assessed Thermopylae, his agoge-conditioned mind ran a different calculation. The variables were not life or death, but strategic cost versus political gain. He was not trapped by a sunk cost fallacy of defending a doomed position. Instead, he recognized a unique opportunity for asymmetric warfare, waged not against Persian bodies, but against the Persian concept of victory and, more importantly, the Greek concept of resistance. The strategic landscape was dire. Xerxes' army was a tool of psychological warfare in itself. A host so vast, it was designed to inspire terror and compel submission before a single spear was thrown. Greece, meanwhile, was not a nation. It was a fractured, bickering collection of city-states, many already defecting or paralyzed by fear. The oracle at Delphi had given a typically ambiguous, terrifying prophecy. Either Sparta would be destroyed, or it would lose a king. A conventional mind sees a prophecy to be feared. A Spartan mind, trained in logical austerity, sees a political tool. Leonidas, being of the royal bloodline, understood his unique position. He saw that a simple military defeat at Thermopylae would be a disaster, confirming Greek fears and shattering the fragile alliance. A retreat would be just as ruinous, signaling that even Spartans feared the Persian host. He needed a third option, a move that would simultaneously solve a political problem, a military problem, and a psychological one. The algorithm was clear. A tactical sacrifice was required to achieve a grand strategic victory. He didn't want to die. He calculated that his death, framed correctly, was the single most powerful strategic asset he possessed. Leonidas's selection of the 300 was, itself, the first act of this psychological operation. He famously chose only men who already had living sons. This was not a gesture of compassion. It was a cold, strategic requirement. He was ensuring the continuity of the Spartan bloodlines, yes, but more importantly, he was hand-selecting men who had a deep, tangible stake in the future they were dying to protect. He was filtering for maximum psychological resilience. This was not a conscripted mob driven by fear. It was a cohort of 300 men who, like their king, understood the algorithm. They were not victims. They were, in essence, co-conspirators in a grand strategic gambit. The pass of Thermopylae was the perfect stage. It was a physical bottleneck that acted as a psychological force multiplier. It neutralized Xerxes' primary weapon, the terror of overwhelming numbers. The battle for the pass, which raged for 2 days, was a physical manifestation of a cognitive choke point. Here, Leonidas didn't just defend. He curated the battle. Contemporary accounts, notably from Herodotus, describe the Spartans' superior discipline. They executed feigned retreats, a complex tactic, requiring immense cohesion and trust, luring the Persian immortals into the narrow pass, only to turn and slaughter them. Here, we must see this not as a simple tactic, but as a deliberate piece of psychological warfare. Each feigned retreat was a micro-narrative. It was engineered to sow cognitive dissonance in the minds of the Persian soldiers, and more critically, in the mind of Xerxes himself, who watched from a nearby throne. The Persians were told the Greeks were few and terrified. Instead, they found an enemy that was professional, precise, and utterly unbreakable. Xerxes wasn't just losing soldiers, he was losing his aura of invincibility. The Spartans were demonstrating that this supposed force of nature, this army that drank rivers dry, could be bled by a handful of professionals. This was a direct attack on Xerxes' center of gravity, his own self-perception of divine right and overwhelming power. Then came the moment the calculation had always anticipated: the betrayal. When Ephialtes revealed the goat path, the tactical situation became untenable. The pincer movement was now inevitable. For the other Greek contingents, the mission was over. The conventional military algorithm was simple. The position is lost. Therefore, retreat and preserve forces for the next fight. But for Leonidas, the real mission was just beginning. This was the crucible. This was the moment of maximum pressure, where his psychological objective would be achieved. His decision to dismiss the other Greek contingents was not an act of kindness or a noble sacrifice. It was a masterful, cold-blooded act of narrative control. By sending them away, he ensured there would be survivors to carry the correct story back to their cities. A story not of a panicked rout, but of a calculated, deliberate Spartan stand. He was authoring the legend in real time. We see his cold calculation again, in his decision to force the Theban contingent, whose loyalty was suspect, to remain. They were not allies, they were hostages, a final, brutal political statement. The final stand of the 300 was the bloody climax of the operation. It was no longer a battle for a pass. It was a battle for a symbol. By refusing to surrender, by refusing to retreat, by forcing the most powerful army on earth to expend thousands of its elite troops, to slaughter them to the last man, Leonidas engineered the psychological breach. Let us analyze the rival minds. Xerxes, a monarch defined by a potent confirmation bias, believed his will was reality. He could not comprehend an enemy who did not value their own survival above all. Herodotus reports that Xerxes leapt up from his throne 3 times in terror and frustration. He was watching his entire theory of power, his psychological toolkit of fear and awe, disintegrate against 300 men. Leonidas forced Xerxes to pay an exorbitant price in blood and morale for something he technically already possessed: the pass. But the true target of this psyop wasn't just Xerxes. It was Athens, Corinth, and Thebes. The news of Thermopylae was designed to be an electric shock to the fractured Greek political system. It shattered the groupthink of despair. It proved the Persian was not a god, but a man who could be made to bleed. It provided a rallying cry, a symbol of impossible resistance that shamed the wavering city-states into unity. The 300 did not save Greece at Thermopylae. They provided the psychological catalyst that allowed the Greeks to save themselves weeks later. In the naval battle at Salamis, Leonidas traded his 300 Spartans and his own life for the single most valuable commodity in war: unified political will. When we conduct the analytical debrief of Thermopylae, the scoreboard is deeply misleading. Tactically, it was a total Persian victory. Strategically, it was a catastrophic failure for Xerxes, and he never fully understood why. Here, we see the operation's ultimate success. Leonidas's objective was never to hold the pass. It was to expend it, and his men, at the highest possible psychological cost to the enemy. He correctly identified that the true center of gravity for the Persian campaign was not its vast army, but its aura of inevitable victory and the psychological terror it inspired. By forcing the world's greatest army to spend 3 days and thousands of its best troops to eradicate just 300 men, Leonidas shattered that aura. He did not just kill Persians. He planted a seed of doubt in the mind of every soldier and in the mind of their king. He demonstrated that the cost of conquering Greece would be agonizing. This psychological friction would plague Xerxes for the rest of the campaign, a cognitive burden that compounded his later tactical errors at Salamis. But the primary target of this operation was his own side. The 300 were a sacrifice, but they were also a message. Leonidas, in his final act, effectively seized control of the Greek narrative. The news that filtered back was not "we lost," but the Spartans chose to die rather than retreat. This act of calculated martyrdom served as a profound psychological catalyst. It shamed the wavering city-states. It stiffened the resolve of the undecided. It provided the time and, more critically, the political will for Themistocles to rally the allied fleet at Salamis. The physical stand at Thermopylae failed. The psychological operation, however, was a flawless success. Leonidas used his own death as a precision instrument to redefine the war, trading a small piece of land and a royal guard for the strategic resource of unified resolve. He lost the battle, but in doing so, he set the psychological conditions for winning the war. Leonidas's strategy required him to sacrifice his 300 elite soldiers and himself, all to send a psychological message. But this gamble depended entirely on the other Greeks interpreting that message correctly. If you were in his position, would you risk the elite core of your army on the hope that their sacrifice would inspire unity? Or would you have preserved them for a future, more conventional battle? Share your strategic assessment in the comments below.